Ying.
And I'm the host, Kevin Chin.
Today we are going to discuss how the rise of China is reshaping the global balance of powers and whether this rise challenges US hegemony and also its implication for the international stability.
Yes, this is one of the most important issues in international relations today because China has expanded rapidly in economic, diplomatic, technological, and military aspects.
To make this podcast more interactive and interesting, we also collected some questions from our audience online and we will answer them throughout this discussion.
So first, let's start with the background of China's rise. We received a question from our audience asking how did China become such a powerful country in today's world. China's rise began in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms. China shifted from a centrally planned economy toward a more market-oriented economy and opened itself to foreign investment and global trade. These reforms allowed China to achieve an average GDP growth rate of nearly 10% annually for several decades, which is considered one of the most fastest economic growth period in modern history. After joining the World Trade Organization or WTO, China has became deeply integrated into global economy in 2001. Eventually, China became the world's second largest economy, and by purchasing power parity or PPP, China was already considered the world's largest economy in 2016.
So we now have a basic understanding about the rise of China. So now let's move on into the theoretical framework of this report. We got questions from our audience like what theory can explain the rise of China and the competition between China and the United States. Our report mainly views realism and power transition theory. According to realism, the international system is anarchic, meaning that there is no central authority controlling any other state. Because of this, countries are competing with each other for powers and security. And from this perspective, China's rise is considered a natural outcome of increasing economic and military capabilities. Meanwhile, power transition theory explains that instability often occurs when a rising power approaches the strength of a dominant hegemon. In this case, China is considered as the rising power, while the United States is the existing hegemon, which explains why competition between these two countries has intensified in the world today.
And now let's discuss how China is reshaping the global balance of power economically. This question comes from another audience asking how is the rise of China changing the global economy. Economically, China has become one of the most important centers of global trade. Today, China is the largest trading partner for many countries such as Germany, India, Vietnam, and South Korea. One major factor behind this influence is the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013. By May 2025, around 150 countries had signed Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) with China under the BRI framework. Through the BRI, China invests in infrastructure projects such as port, railways, roads, airports, and energy networks across Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. According to the report, China's bilateral trade with BRI participating countries reached RMB 23.6 trillion, accounting for about 51.9% of China's total foreign trade value. This strengthens China's economic ties globally and reduces dependence on the United States economically.
Based on economy, China is also expanding its diplomatic influence globally. We have a question from our audience who asks, how is China increasing its diplomatic power? China has become increasingly active in international organizations and global governance. For example, China established the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or we call SCO, together with countries such as Russia, India, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and Iran. China also promoted institutions like the
5G technology, so semiconductors, renewable energy, and also electric vehicles. According to the report, China is the first country to surpass 5 million valid invention patents, showing its strong dominance in research and development. China also owns more than 70% of global drone trade-related patent application and accounts for around 70% of global electric vehicle production. In addition, China controls approximately 80% of global solar panel industry, positioning itself as a leader in green technology and renewable energy. China companies such as Huawei, BYD, Alibaba, and Tencent are now competing directly with major American companies.
So now move on to China military and strategic influence. China military goal is also reshaping the balance of power across the world. So we have a question here from our audience. How has China military expansion affected the international relation? China has significantly modernized its military over the past 2 decades and is now the world's second largest military spender after the United States. So in March 2020, China announced a defense budget of around RMB 1.91 trillion, which is approximately USD 277 billion. China has developed advanced missile system, fighter jets, cyber capabilities, naval expansions, and a growing nuclear arsenal. According to a report, China nuclear stockpile reached around 600 warheads in 2025. Another important point here is the PLA Navy, which is the Navy Army under China, overtook the US Navy in the numbers of battle force ships in 2014. One major issue is between the China and the United States is the South China Sea dispute, where China claimed that the largest portion of the South China Sea using the 9-dash line, and it had built artificial island equipped with military facility to protect the territory surrender. However, the United States see this action as an attempt to expand Chinese regional dominance and a threat to freedom of navigation.
So now let's move on into the China challenges the US hegemony. These questions come from another audience asking how does China challenge the United States economically? China challenges US hegemony by becoming a global economic powerhouse and reducing American economic dominance. China is one of the world's largest trading nations, has expanded its economic influence through trade, investment, and Belt and Road Initiative. Many developing countries now rely heavily on China for infrastructure, development, and trade partnership, reducing US influence globally. This economic rivalry eventually contributed to the US-China trade war that started in 2018, where the United States imposed tariffs and restrictions on Chinese goods and technology.
So we have a question from our audience. Why does the United States see China as a military threat? China military modernization narrowed the military gap between itself and the United States. According to the Global Firepower 2026, the United States remains as the world's strongest military with a power index of 0.047.
A few moments later.
741, while China ranked 3 globally with a power index of 0.091, 9.9, 919. Although the United States is still strong overall, China's rapid growing of military growth has intensified strategic competition between both countries. And the issue of the South China Sea and the Taiwan dispute have become a major strategy flashpoint between the United States and China.
Yeah, we also have another question asking how does China challenge the US diplomatic dominance? For decades, the United States dominated global diplomacy through institutions such as the United States, IMF, and World Bank. However, China is now promoting alternative institutions and strengthening diplomatic relations with developing countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. China also promotes a multipolar world order rather than the US unipolar system.
So moving to the next section, we have questions from our audience. Why is the technological competition between China and the United States become so intense? Technological leadership determines the future economy and the military power of a country. China's rapid development in AI, semiconductors, telecommunications, and renewable energy directly challenge American technology dominance across the world. So this is why US imposed sanctions and export restriction on China technological company, especially Huawei.
So now let's discuss the implications for international stability. This question from another audience asking, what impact does China's rise have on global stability? One major impact is the security dilemma. When China increases its military capabilities for security purpose, the United States and its allies perceive it as a threat and respond by increasing their own military presence. For example, the US strengthened alliances such as Quad QAD with Japan, India, and Australia to counterbalance China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. This creates mistrust, tension, strategic competition between both sides.
We also receive a question from our audience. Is the world becoming bipolar or multipolar? Some scholars argue that the world is becoming bipolar because the United States and China are clearly the strongest power in the world now. But others argue that the world is becoming multipolar because countries like India, Russia, and even the EU, European Union, has also hold significant influence across the world. So today's world might actually contain both bipolar and multipolar characteristics simultaneously, but one point for sure is that the US hegemony is declining.
Yeah, so the next question from another audience is asking about, does the Belt and Road Initiative improve or threaten international stability? The Belt and Road Initiative has both positive and negative impacts. On the positive side, the BRI has launched more than 3,000 cooperation projects globally, created over 430,000 jobs, and helped live around 40 million people out of poverty. In 2025 alone, BRI projects achieved approximately USD 138.4 billion in construction contracts and USD 85.2 billion in investment. However, critics argue that some countries may become dependent on Chinese loans and investment, creating debt problems and political dependence. The BRI also intensifies strategic competition between China and the United States, which can increase geopolitical tensions.
So in conclusion, China's rise is significantly reshaping the global balance of power, economically, diplomatically, technologically, and militarily. This rise clearly challenges US hegemony, but it does not necessarily mean that conflict is unavoidable. Instead, the international system is becoming more competitive, interconnected, and complex. The future of international stability will depend on how both China and the United States manage their competition in coming years. Thank you for everyone listening to our podcast today.
And we hope you enjoyed the discussion. See you next time.